Hello friends, welcome to the Jazz Ranch. Season's greetings. I'm your alter dominant ego man. You can call me Mr. Ego. You know, it's Christmas time, and you know, we get the horses rigged up to the sleigh so you can go out on sleigh rides. And then when you come back, we hang out around the campfire singing Christmas songs and scatting to bebop tunes. How about that? You know, it's the only ranch where you can do that. Well, you know, I got invited to go up to the North Pole again to meet Santa, you know, and I got invited by my friends, you know, the two Christmas ghosts. I'm a ghost, so, you know, Marley's ghost and the ghost of Christmas Past are my buddies, you know, we hang out. And so they invited me to go with them up to the North Pole to meet Santa Claus again. I had a bad experience last year, but anyway, the KH went with me, you know, so when we got to the front door, you know, Santa greeted us, you know, and he welcomed in Marley's ghost and the ghost of Christmas Past, because, you know, they're Christmas ghosts, you know, they're in the Dickens story, the Christmas Carol, you know. So then the KH got there, Santa asked him, what do you do for a living? And he said, well, I'm a jazz musician. He said, well, we like the fact that jazz musicians have made recordings of the song Santa Claus is Coming to Town and Jingle Bells and all that. I like that, so you can come right on in. You know, but then when I got to the front door, you know, he asked me what I am and what I do, and I said, I'm an alter ego. Oh, I said, oh, you got to go around the back, go through the kitchen, and meet my alter ego. You know, I had to go back to the back door, come into the kitchen, and be interviewed by Santa's alter ego. Imagine that. Well, anyway, he interviewed me, and you know what he told me? He told me this. He said, they're going to give Santa Claus a week's vacation after Christmas because of all the hard work he's done, and they're going to let him go down to Florida. Now, can you imagine that? Imagine if you were walking down the beach and you see Santa Claus lying on a beach chair wearing nothing but a pair of Speedos. Man, I'd be shocked. You know, anyway, well, here comes the KH. He's got the guard dog. He's coming up the walkway, and the guard dog's got a red ribbon around him. You know, it's Christmas time. Anyway, I'll say Merry Christmas. I got to split. See you next time. Bye-bye. Hello, friends. Welcome to the Jazz Ranch North. It's Season's greetings. And I'm sorry about the alter dominant man. He always cuts in on my introductions, but we did go to the North Pole, and so that's a true story, if you believe that. And I've got my special hat that I got up there. So I got this from the Mounties up in Canada. And so I'm going to be playing a song for you for the season called Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. And then I'm going to talk about it later on, specifically addressing the use of tritone substitutes. So here we go now with a great song, and I'll talk about it later on. Here we go with Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. Okay, welcome to the Jazz Studio, where I talk about what I played and explain some concepts. And specifically, today I'm going to be talking about the tritone substitute and how I used it in this song. So I'm just going to start out by explaining the concept first and show it to you in my book. Now, if you're playing a 2-5-1, I'll keep it simple. We're in the key of C for this song anyway. So if you're playing a 2-5-1, D minor 7, G7, C major 7 or C6, we take the 5 chord. Now we want to replace it with its tritone substitute. So a G7 now, if you take a G7 and go up 3 scale tones, whole tones, you're going to get to D flat. Now we make the D flat the dominant 7th. That replaces the G7. That's this tritone substitute. So we're replacing the 5 chord of the dominant 7th with another dominant 7th that substitutes for it. And what it does is, instead of a cyclical movement, we're creating a chromatic movement. D minor 7, D flat 7, C major 7. Like that. So it creates a chromatic approach to whatever chord you're moving to. So you'll see that happening and how I'm using it in this tune. So we'll check out the concept in my book next. So now here's a quick look into my book. You can see it's designed to be in a 3-ring binder, which is very practical because you can take pages out to photocopy them. And you can also, it will lie flat on the music stand, so it's very convenient that way. Now here's the chapter in volume 2 on tritone substitution. Actually, it's on reharmonization, and this is the specific page on tritone substitution, showing it on the cycle of fifths. So if you were to take a G7, you go straight across on the cycle to see that D flat 7 is the tritone substitute. If it's a B flat 7, then you go straight across and you can see E7 is the tritone substitute. It works perfectly. And then there's a few examples here of how it's used in a progression, and then you have a song that utilizes it throughout the song, uses tritone substitutes. And here's another one as well on substitution and tritone substitute. So the book is very practical that way. You want to check it out on my website. Okay, this is an insert. Now I should point out something that's very interesting about the tritone substitute and any chord that substitutes for another chord. Usually it has to do with they have common tones. In other words, they have the same notes in the chord. So, you know, that's why we use the 3 chord as a substitute for a 1, because they have 3 notes in common. Now, in this case, on a G, let's take G7 as an example. If we were to add the flat 9 and we took those 3 notes above the root, we'd have B, D, F, A flat, right? Now let's play its tritone substitute, D flat, and if we add the flat 9 to that, now we have notes in common with the G7 flat 9. We have 4 notes in common. It's 4. We have the 3rd, the 5th, the 7th, and the flat 9 are all in common. The only one that isn't is the root. The root, of course, changes. Now that's quite interesting, you know. In other words, let's look at a G7. Compare it to a D flat 7. In other words, the 3rd, the B, in a D flat chord is the 7th, flat 7. Alright? The 5, the D, is the flat 9. The flat 9 of the D flat 7, right? The 7 of the G7 is the 3rd, right? 3rd of the D flat 7 flat 9. And the flat 9 of the G7 is the 5th of the D flat 7th. You see, so they exchange the 3rd and the 7th, and the flat 9s and the 5th exchange between the two chords. Now that's fascinating, and also I should point out that in the G7 flat 9, that particular family would be also B flat 7 flat 9, and then the tritone, which is the D flat 7 flat 9, and then the E 7 flat 9. So all those four chords all have the same notes in common, except for the root. So there's an aha moment for you right there. So you want to, look at my videos on not only diminished chords, but also substitute and reharmonization and how you use substitute chords. But that's a fascinating thing about how this all works, and the relationship between a dominant 7th chord and its tritone substitution. Tune. I'm just going to start at the beginning and show you the introduction is just a pedal tone. I use pedal tones a lot as an introduction because it stops the motion, and it's a really nice sound to begin as an introduction. So I have a C with a G in the bass, moving to an F sharp diminished with this G in the bass to an F, which is a G sus, and then a D flat, which is sort of like a tritone substitute because it's going to approach a C chord. But now I don't resolve the C chord with its root. I keep the 5 in the bass, like. I think it's a pretty sound to begin the melody with. So, because you have the melody note being the root anyway, so why double the root in the bass? Make it a 5 chord with the C there. Then it goes down to A minor, the 6th chord. Now the next chord is D minor on the next measure. D minor, 11. So I'm going to approach the D minor chord now with the tritone substitute, but it has to be the tritone substitute of its 5, not of the A minor. So I'm going to use the chord that would approach a D minor 7, and that would be its 5 chord. So 5 of D minor 7 is A7. So let's use the A7 and find its tritone substitute. So it goes up, we go up 3 whole tones. A, B, C sharp, E flat, or it's flat 5. Flat 5 of A is E flat. Now we make that a dominant 7th, and that's the approach to the D minor 7. Now you have to clarify that by seeing that it is approaching the D minor from a half step above. So you'd have C, A minor, E flat 7, D minor. So that E flat 7 now has the 13 in it. The melody note becomes the 13. Yeah. I can add the 9 there. And then continuing. 2, 5. Now here I don't resolve it. I could go put the G there, but I go D minor, F minor, B flat. So I use a 2, 5, F minor 7, B flat. Those are just substitute chords. I'm not going to talk about those in this video. I'm going to talk about tritone substitutes. So here we go. Next chord I use is a C with an E in the bass. Why? I use the G in the bass first, so now I want to vary it. Because the melody note's a C, I just don't want to play a C in the bass. It stops the movement. With the E there now here, I'm going to do 2 sets of tritone substitutes. I'm approaching the A again. But this time, instead of an A minor, I'm going to use an A7. Why? Just keeps it harmonically interesting. You don't repeat yourself. Even the melody's repeating itself. Play a different voicing of the chord, or play a different chord progression. So here I'm going to use the tritone substitute to approach the A7. How do I get that tritone? Same concept. I take the A7 and say, what would its 5 be? E7, and I use the tritone of the E7, which would be B flat. Up to 3 whole tones. So B flat 7 would approach the A7 from a half step above. So you want to rewind this and listen to that if you didn't get that. It's a little tricky. You know, I mean, I'll show you that. You know, I show you that in my book, but you want to be sure that you understand that you're using the tritone substitute of the approach chord, which is 5, the 5th step in the scale of the chord that you're approaching. So the 5th step of A7 would be E. Now use its tritone substitute, which would be its flat 5 of its scale. So it's a scale of a scale, you know. B flat A would, so now it sounds like this. C chord, B flat, tritone substitute to the A7, and then a E flat 7 there to approach the D minor. But I did something different. You're expecting the E flat 7 with the melody note C. I put in a melody note B and I made it diminished first. I used diminished. Why did I do that? For variation. So I'm just not repeating myself with a bunch of tritone substitutes. I'm going to mix in some diminished approaches as well. You can approach a chord from its half step below or half step above using a diminished chord. That's another rule, and that's another secret. So, aha! You know, it sounds real pretty, right? Instead of this, I'm using putting beauty into that harmonic structure. Now I have this fill. What is this fill? Those are thirds, first of all, mostly minor thirds, but it's a diminished scale. And this is something that Bill Evans does a lot. It's an A flat diminished scale. So it has those A flat, B flat, G flat. So I'm using it like this. Real pretty line, and it's built on the D minor 7, G7. You say, well, how can you use that on a, why using an A flat diminished? Because the A flat diminished relates directly to the G7. It's the same scale, same altered scale. G7 uses that same scale as the A flat diminished. It adds the color tones of the flat 9, the sharp 9, the sharp 11, the 13. Alter dominant against the G7. So I can use it on the 2 as well. It rubs right there. Or I could make that diminished. If you don't like the rub, make that diminished, then go to D minor. But I like it. Now, here I use something different. Instead of using tritone substitutes, I use more scalar movement. Like here. G with a B in the bass. The A minor. Now here's the tritone substitute. That's a little bit of a rub there, because it's a flat 9. You can voice it like that, maybe it's a little clearer, like voicing it like that. Now here, what is this sound? What is that sound? That's the drop 2. So I'm taking the block chords like this, close voicings like this on the melody. And then a diminished chord on that non-chord tone to the E7. Now, why did I use the drop 2? Because it works well on scale lines like that. That's a scalar line. It goes right down the scale. So now I can use these chords, block chords. So I just take the second note from the top, put it down an octave in the left hand. Sorry, it's the B. So it's the B. There, that's pretty, right? Sounds very Christmassy, actually. Okay. Then here becomes diminished. It's not this. It's not. I'm not. Could be that, but diminished is better. To the 3 chord in dominant form and 13, so it has tritone substitute, 6 chord, using these diminished runs again, diminish pattern again, and there's another diminished chord. It's a G7 really with a 13, but it has the diminished sound to it. Then I go up an octave. Now, here's really, and then I did something, that's Oscar Peterson. Those dominant 7/9 chords, voiced that way with the 11 on top. Parallel movement. That's a very typical Oscar Peterson type of voicing. Learn those. So check out the score and learn those voicings. So now a typical, I'm moving up an octave, so now I can play rootless voicings in the mid-range. So I'm going to do this on the third measure of that next section. I'm going to do this. That's pure Bill Evans. And it's using the tritone substitute. So C, G diminished, B flat 7 tritone substitute, E flat 7 tritone substitute. See, normally it would be this. As simple as that, now it becomes this. Very rich, very interesting reharmonization, and really using and understanding the use of the tritone substitute. So I'm going to leave it at that point. I'm going to leave this at that point. If I talked about everything I did in this arrangement, it'd be a 40-minute video. I want to keep this short and interesting, to keep you involved in this video so that you will learn about the tritone substitute and try to play it in songs that you're working on, because you can use it in any song you're working on to create a more rich harmonic structure and a more interesting chord progression, and then also solo on those chords, so have something more interesting going on in your solo instead of just being See, so you can solo on those tritone substitute chord scales, the scale of those tritone substitute, and add some additional notes. And there's a lot more you can do with those tritone substitutes as well. You can solo over them on the original chord and create, like a different kind of sound by using notes that are outside of the scale. So I'm going to leave it at that and sign off. Here we go with our sign off. Signing off from the Jazz Ranch. Thanks so much for tuning in. Please write to me. I love to hear from you. I always respond to all comments if you give me enough time. Please check out my book on my website. And I'll say season's greetings. We'll see you next time around. And in the words of Hermie Dressel, swing loose. And we'll see you later on. Bye-bye.